Hello, everybody. This is EducationUSA Bosnia-Herzegovina. My name is Aleksandra Popovic, and I work as EducationUSA advisor in Sarajevo. We are here today to talk about admissions to graduate schools in the United States, and we have a very special guest with us from University of Tennessee, Denita Hadziabdic Guerry, who's actually from Bosnia-Herzegovina. You will hear about that a little bit later when she starts introducing herself. But I also want to welcome our guests from Bosnia-Herzegovina, from Ghana, and from Georgia. And especially our special guest, Gary Beckman, who is one of the reasons, as I heard, that Denita is doing what she's doing today.
Oh, gosh.
Thank you all for coming. And I really hope you will enjoy this session. And I know that I will do, because I tell you the truth, I saw the slides. Denita, please, thank you.
Sure, I'm gonna share my screen. And so what I'm gonna do for a moment, I'm gonna stop my video. And I wanna make sure that everybody can hear me well. And I'll start from there. Are we good?
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me well, Alexandra?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good.
I hear you perfectly.
So what I would like to talk today about is the tips for successful graduate school application. And if anybody has a question in the meantime, feel free to post in chat. And Alexandra, you can read, I can stop. This can be very informal. And I can ask questions after that. Also, for those of you, although we have some English-speaking area people here, we also have a lot of Bosnians, and I'm native Bosnian, so I do speak Bosnian as well. So for those of you that are not from Bosnia, this is how I have to start most of my presentations. Unfortunately, I have to point the big error to the country that I'm from, partially because I've been asked all sorts of questions from whether I'm Bosnia is in Asia, part of Russia, and all sorts of other interesting connections to the world, but I usually explain it's across the Italy, and that's a safe bet for most people that have issues with geography and knowing where Bosnia is. But since we have majority of Bosnians in this group, so no need for geographical lessons. For those of you that are not from Bosnia or Sarajevo, that this is where I'm from originally. I was born and raised in Sarajevo, Bosnia, and I left when I was 20 years old. This is the capital of the country, and it has a really interesting historical combinations between East and West, Ottoman Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire. So there's a lot of cultural influences, but most of the people associate Bosnia with the Bosnian War from 1992 to 95. So I was 13 when the war started, and my whole family was there during the war, and I came to the States 4 years after the war in 1999. So this is usually what I use for my grad students when they start complaining. I tell them the story that the picture on the bottom left is basically how we went to school on a daily basis. So I live in suburbs, and those from Sarajevo, I was born and raised in Alupashno Polje. So for me to go to high school, which was located in downtown, which was Prva Gimnazija, it's usually an hour and a half by foot. So you have to go through a bunch of road crossings, and these shipment containers were basically the only protection from snipers. So we had to cross quite a few of those in order to go to school in each direction. So when students start complaining and saying how rough it is, I just remind them of a story once upon a time. So, but one of the interesting things that I really want to point with all the atrocity that war brings, that even during this period of time, women were always dressed up. They were always well taken care of, and high heels, and as you can see the picture here, high heels and running next to the basically Sniper Avenue. But my journey started a long time ago. It started, I went to Prva Gimnazija, which is the high school for those from other parts of the country, of the world. in Bosnia, we have almost a version of a qualifier, like very similar to college in the US, where you have to pass certain entrance exams to and have certain grades from elementary school, which is 8 years, to qualify to certain high schools. I went to Prva gimnazija. After that, I went to study horticulture because I wanted to work with something that you can kill, not necessarily feel super bad about it. I wanted to actually study biology originally, but I was told that you have to dissect pigeons, and I was not a big fan of that. And I realized I needed to do something that does not involve killing animals or dissecting animals. So the only thing that was available at the time was horticulture for me. And if it wasn't for that, I would never be in the US. So all the things in my life led to certain crossroads. From there, I went to Tennessee Tech University for my undergraduate, which is a smaller university between Nashville and Knoxville. And for those of you that are not from the US, Nashville is the capital of the state of Tennessee. And that's basically maybe just an hour from Nashville. So my American, well, I call them my American family there. I have my real Bosnian family, but there was a family that took me under their wing and they took me to Disney. And the trip to Disney absolutely changed my life because I really wanted to explore something that I've never seen before, which eventually led me to University of Tennessee for grad school and LSU, which is Louisiana State University, for my first job. So my first job at this is equivalent to the Ministry of Agriculture in Nashville. I did a landscaping horticulture job, and I realized I really did not enjoy that. So oftentimes I say to students, you may not know what you want, but you will definitely know what you don't want. So I realized this is not something, I'm not very visual person, so I did not enjoy designing. And then I got a job at Epcot, which is behind the seed tour, which is working in hydroponics greenhouses. And there is where I actually got introduced to tissue culture. For those that are not familiar with that, this is basically, you can produce everything in these baby jars. It creates artificial environment, and a lot of plants like bananas, pineapples, plants that are real, and orchids that are very hard to produce and propagate, they're produced this way. But this is very controlled, very interesting, very scientific approach how to do this. And you can see here, this is sand. So hydroponics is alternative production, everything but the soil. So this was actually originally started in Israel, partially because they do not have a lot of good quality land to grow things, so they had to find alternative ways. But I was so fascinated with tissue culture, and I wanted to do that for my grad school, and I realized I really enjoyed research. And the reason I enjoyed research is, for a few of you that joined us earlier, Dr. Bachman, my undergraduate mentor, is here, and he introduced me to research early on. I did that as undergraduate research, which is another reason I'm very passionate about undergraduate research in my own lab. And what he did was, he basically, we did a very simple research. He took me to the national conference, and it was very intimidating for undergrad, non-native speaker. I was very nervous about it. I was very young. I was thinking there's so many smart, amazing people. They're gonna ask me hard questions. But really, people are there to see you succeed. And at that particular conference, I met my master's advisor, and I started basically grad school with him. After I graduated from my master's, my first real job was at Louisiana State University as a plant disease diagnostician. So what that really means is that each state in the United States has one disease clinic, and any resident of that particular state can send samples to the clinic, and my job was to tell them what was wrong, what kind of pest they had, and how to treat that particular problem. It could be your average gardener, and it can be a farmer with thousands of acres. But if you remember from the very beginning, I was in Bosnia during the war, so I did not need another one in the US. So I was in Louisiana when Katrina hit New Orleans, and Baton Rouge is where LSU is located, which is only less than an hour away from New Orleans. So when I saw that, my reaction was, I'm not staying in Louisiana. I just do not need another hurricane. I do not need empty grocery stores. I do not need anything that reminds me of war. So I decided to go back to school and get a PhD, and I finished my PhD. And my lab right now is focusing on forest pathology and fungal genetics. We do population genetics and conservation of endangered and native species. So nobody wakes up one day thinking they're going to be forest pathologist or fungal geneticist. So it was a slow evolution on my part, how I started working from horticulture to plant pathology to disease diagnostics, and eventually fungal genetics, and things that led me to basically amazing parts in my life. These are the grad students and postdocs from my lab, and people that I mentored, just very few that worked on different parts of the problem. And this is a current student, Meher. She's from Bangladesh. This is actually not updated presentation, what it seems, but we'll go with that. So this is Beyond, he's from India. And then my PhD student from Aaron, he's from US. And I have another student from Ghana. So conservation genetics and population genetics is what I usually do. When I got Fulbright fellowship, I went to Ghana and I worked with a number of people. This is a really interesting concept because this particular plant here is anti-malarial plant, and we use different parts of that plant. We're doing population genetics basically to figure out how genetically diverse these populations. But in Ghana, they drink this, the root system of this plant when boiled. Basically, they use that for treating malaria. But that also led me to Fulbright, and I'd be happy to talk to everybody about Fulbright Fellowship. And this is not just for US citizens, this is for non-US citizens as well, and students can apply for that. So I was exposed to a number of different people, different cultures, beautiful areas that really changed my outlook on life. Because of that, this is why I love traveling. It changes the way you see things. It changes the way you perceive the world. And this is one of my favorite Mark Twain's quotes. Because when you start traveling, and I'm not talking about traveling and seeing the world itself. When I was even in Bosnia, I don't think I explored as much in Bosnia when I was there, explore all the mountains and rivers, because I do enjoy camping and outdoorsy stuff. But I think when you go and travel to different places, you just see the world through very different eyes. So how is this whole story of my life connected to grad school? I did not come, I'm a first gen, which means that basically I'm a first generation college graduate in my family. I'm the first one in my family to get master's and PhD degree. So I do not come from the family with a strong background in educational experiences. And I had to navigate a lot of things on my own, but I was very, very lucky to have amazing people in my life to guide me through things, to guide me through waters of graduate school. Actually, I think this is not up-to-date presentation, but I'll share with you the new one that I put more information and clarified a few things. I realized that throughout the presentation that this is the old one. But when you go through graduate school in the United States, you have two different tracks. So you have Masters of Science or MS, and everything I'm talking today, by the way, is going to be focused on STEM disciplines, which is science, technology, education, and math, engineering and math. So when you go for master's degree, that means after your college degree, after your undergraduate, what we call here, it's a 2-year commitment. It's usually teaching or research, or it could be both. And what that means that assistantship is provided, and I'll mention and talk a little bit about assistantship later on. you do experimental part of your research. So in sciences, it has to be that you do some kind of research or teaching for your project. And then you are expected to publish your work. Usually have thesis at the very end, but we expect in sciences to have a scientific paper. So Doctor of Philosophy or PhD, there are two different tracks to do this. So you can have a master degree and then go for PhD, which is usually 3 to 5 years. It depends from the program. You can also go to straight from undergraduate to PhD, and that would be 4 to 6 years. But that means that the person should have funding for you throughout that period. There are different expectations, definitely for one and the other. And you are expected to have multiple publications for your work and work on multiple scientific papers and extensive writing. And postdoctoral fellowship is basically training that comes after PhD, which is basically independent. You are more or less in the lab, you're running all the projects, but you don't have to take the classes, and you do have real salary and real benefits. So before you even go to grad school, there are pros and cons for graduate school. It's not for everybody. It is very taxing emotionally, financially, although you do have paid assistantship. But it's not, it's enough for you to live and pay living expenses, but it's, you're not going to starve by any shape or form. But anything extra that is needed, if your car breaks down or things happen, that brings additional financial burden to you. You have to work independently. At that point, you're becoming expert in one particular field. So you have to have certain desire to change the world and go beyond yourself. So you're solving part of the puzzle, and you have to be part of the solution of some sort. So there's a professional development that's associated with this. And I mentioned the paid assistantship. I know that is very different for Bosnian students. They're not necessarily familiar with that system, but in the US, if I want to accept somebody in my lab and they officially have to be accepted by grad school, then they have to be accepted by our department. There are certain requirements, and I'll talk about that later. But I provide all the funding for the student. That means I pay their tuition, which again, this is very university dependent. And I can tell you for the University of Tennessee, which is in Knoxville, Tennessee. So roughly around $14,000 a year is in-state tuition only, and around $31,000 for internationals. But when we accept foreign students for grad school, they pay, or we pay as PIs, which is the principal investigator, which is basically the leader of the lab. We pay their tuition. On top of that, we pay, at the University of Tennessee, we pay their health insurance, some other fees, and we pay their stipend. That stipend is basically covering your living expenses. That's like a little salary for you to do research on your own, focused on your research, and then some research or help for your professor. If you teach, or if I teach something, I expect my students to help with labs or to help me teach, or they help with some side projects that I have that are not necessarily their own research projects. For master's students in my department, it's around $18,000 a year. And for PhD, again, this can vary between departments and between labs, because if the principal investigator has a little bit more money on a grant, they can pay a little bit more for these students. But that is the minimum. And for PhD, the minimum is $20,000. So that is guaranteed that you will get, that is per year. So that is guaranteed that you will get every month. And that basically covers your apartment, your food, and then you're responsible for certain fees each semester, which that depends on the number of classes you have. So you have research and teaching opportunities, and you definitely have to have intellectual curiosity. And I know this is something that we're not necessarily used to, in a sense of when we do research, you do what you're told, and that's not what we expect here. Yes, you come here to do certain project, but I let my students flourish and come up with their own ideas, because that is important too. Sometimes they see things through very different lenses as well. They figure things out in a much easier, better way than I can. They come from different labs where they do things differently, which is maybe more efficient. So you're flexible, they're flexible. So there's a little bit of fluidity between learning and teaching. And I always tell them, as much as I learn from them, they learn from me as well. So it's back and forth, and it's not one-way street. But the best part is I have actually lifetime friends and collaborators throughout my grad school. The reason not to go to grad school is just because it's a cool thing to do, because somebody else told you to do, or you do not know what else to do. And oftentimes students do that here because they either don't have a real job, or I guess that's the next best option. And partially because this is paid and you will have income throughout this period of time. But the biggest thing about grad school is you have to be willing to fail, or willingness to fail over and over again. Experiments will fail. I can guarantee that part, that things will not go well. But the biggest thing, and this is why I really, really love this quote from President Barack Obama, and I'll let you guys read this on your own, but it does take patience, commitment, and basically grit to finish grad school. It's not that the smartest, you have to be smart enough to get into grad school. If you finish college, you have that ability to go further. But what separates you from others is willingness not to give up when it becomes hard. And I think that is the biggest part. I've seen some people not finishing grad schools because of that. Basically, you just have to fail and fail again and be okay with failing. And what I'm going to be talking about today is the graduate school with a science focus. This is basically, you get research training, you're discovering, exploring, and educating people, and you have to think outside of the box. But you also have to be okay that there is a limited income during the graduate school. Oftentimes we discourage students, even though this is not impossible. For foreign students, this is not an option, but for domestic students, you can work additional hours, but we really want you to focus on grad school, and you're gonna live within a limited income, but you have to think that you are basically investing in your future and a potentially better job down the road. So it would be okay to be a little bit tight on money for a shorter period of time, and then you can basically provide for a little bit better future down the road. So it depends. Sometimes you have research-based assistantship, sometimes you have teaching-based assistantship, sometimes you have both. You have to teach a little bit, or you're exclusively teaching and helping with grading. I do not do any of that. We do not have in my department teaching because we only have graduate level classes. My department does not have undergraduates, so we do not have really big chemistry or biology classes where you have hundreds of students where you really need some help with teaching and grading and quizzing and so on and so forth. And you really have to enjoy it because you will have long hours, you will have weekends that you have to work. And then this is the way to improve, not just to learn new skills, but you also learn, you can take number of professional development classes and courses. Universities here offer all sorts of things where you can learn things that are not necessarily just science focused, but they can develop you as an individual. And I highly encourage my students to do that. And as a matter of fact, our PhD students actually have to do certain things such as mentoring, peer mentoring, teaching. So they have to do all these different things. So the grades for application requirements for United States, you have to have minimum 3.0 on a scale of 4.0. So if I translate that roughly for the US, for Bosnian students, which is on a scale from 6 to 10, I would say that's roughly around 8. But of course, it has to be, everything has to be translated in English by the court appointed translator before you submit any of that. And all foreign students have to take, including domestic students, they have to take GRE, which is the graduate record examination. However, this is changing a little bit throughout the US. Some universities do not require And this is very much university dependent. So you need to check the requirements on the website of the school you're looking at. And part of this is, it is very, it has bias associated with it. It is very unfair for students in foreign countries because it is expensive. I do believe it's around $250 now. So this is around $200 to $250. And then a TOEFL, which is also required, is something along those lines as well. So just to apply for grad school can be expensive. So when you take this exam, you will have options of plenty of online tests that you can take for free, that you can practice. And it's on a scale from basically, you have 3 different sections. You have verbal reasoning, quantitative reasoning, and analytical writing. Oftentimes, foreign students score better in quantitative reasoning because it's more math-based, but that's not always the case. And their verbal reasoning and analytical writing usually follow one another. And we like to see a little bit higher scores because this will really help you down the road with your writing thesis and writing papers. You have to have letters of recommendations. Usually you have to have 3. And then this is, in my opinion, one of the most important parts of your application, the letter of intent. For domestic students, when I say domestic students, I mean Bosnian students right now. We do check for plagiarism. And I went to school in Bosnia, and I know how the grading system and the examining system works. Here, everything goes through the plagiarism software. Do not lift anything off of internet regarding the letter of intent. It has to be you. It has to be written by you. And if this is in the US, they will expel you from school for cheating or plagiarism. So this is a really, really, really big deal. So when I get my new foreign students, I give them a long spiel about plagiarism and that everything that they submit, including exams, go through the plagiarism software. And then you have graduate school or departmental application and your CV. And I'll talk about each one of these sections individually. But this is just to give you an idea. These are the GRE scores from 2014 to 15. And when you take a GRE, your scores are weighed against every single person in the world that's taking GRE that year. So these are just average numbers for all the basically people in the world that took GRE between 2014 and 15. So roughly, verbal reasoning is around 150, and quantitative reasoning is around 153, and analytical writing is around 3.5. In my department, we like to see these 2 combined scores above 300. So the higher the score, the better. And the score of 4 is a really decent writing. So that is something that we like to see, but that's not necessarily the golden rule. So this is when you go for your GRE application, you will have, I just circle here an example. If you score 160, you're gonna have, basically you will rank around 78% of all the people that took GRE that year, which is really, really good. But you can see here, for instance, on the left, if you score just 3 points different between verbal reasoning, you're between 78 and 63 percentile. So that's just for you to give you an idea how that works. So for TOEFL, which is Test of English as a Foreign Language, all foreign students, Ghanaian students do not have to do this. Ghanaians, although they have different languages across the country, English is their official language, so they do not have to do this. And there are some other countries in Africa that they do not have to have TOEFL, but again, double check that with universities because not all universities accept that. So the first number here is going to reflect the TOEFL, and the second number is going to reflect GRE. So I just got some information from 4 different universities. Harvard is one that most people heard. They require TOEFL of 100, which is a very, very good English. Most of my students in the lab right now, they have over 100 TOEFL, and that makes a really big difference. But for them, for instance, the GRE is optional. And Cornell University is another really good public school. For instance, their TOEFL is 77, and their GRE is optional, but this is for the university. And if you go to certain department, let's say you're interested in plant sciences may require at Cornell for you to have GRE. So you have to double check what the program wants and what department wants. So these are the numbers for Virginia Tech and then University of Tennessee. Our minimum is 82 and we require over 300 for GRE. But before you apply to graduate school, you have to gain some experience, and all of you are doing some small jobs or helping with some non-profit agencies or anything at a university or school that can build your CV is something that would be very, very helpful. This is more for the US-based student. Take certain lab, and also for Bosnian students, there are labs associated with certain courses. Although in Bosnia, we do not have an option of choosing classes. They're already selected for you when you start college. In the US, you have that option. So try to take lab courses that will give you hands-on, provide with hands-on experience. Also here for the US students, I always suggest my undergrads to contact the person in the lab. Actually, we have Joe here today with us. He was my undergrad in the lab. He joined the lab and he learned how to isolate DNA, how to do preparation of fungal cultures into long-term storage. He subcultured. So he learned quite a bit of, he gained experience that he can put on his CV and apply for grad school. Also, this is something especially for US students, but also for foreign students as well. Identify and contact productive faculty with research interests that you would like to acquire. So somebody who does some interesting stuff, somebody who does field stuff so you can gain field experience. And this national service opportunities for Ghanaian students, we do not have that, but they have opportunity to do some really neat stuff. Basically, this is their way of giving back to the community. So after they finish college, they are required to give a year or two back in a form of service. So it can be either military service or it can be volunteering at a university. They're still getting paid for that, but this is giving back to the community and the country. And I really like that idea. We have version of that back home in Bosnia. We have a mandatory military service, but that's only for men. And you can volunteer with a number of organizations to gain some leadership and teaching opportunities. This is just something for my field. Also, foreign students can join this as well. You can join certain student scientific organizations. Oftentimes, APS is American Phytopathological Society. So usually they waive any registration fee or membership fee for undergraduate students. So you can join them and maybe get some new tools to learn or participate in online camps for learning new techniques, how to isolate DNA or something along those lines. But oftentimes they're free for undergraduate students. So whatever your field is, from engineering to sciences, you can explore these things as well. And for those of you that are not familiar with Coursera, that is actually a fantastic opportunity. A lot of my students were doing that during the COVID period when we were staying at home. You can take a number of classes and get certificates, everything from bioinformatics to coding to history to learning new languages and everything else in between. And you can get certificates for this. They're usually a week or two, and sometimes you have a number of these courses. So utilize this when it's free. So you think you're ready to apply. So do you have all the necessary documents? So you have to have these pieces of information before you apply to grad school. You have to know the deadline for application. So this is extremely important. Usually for foreign students, you have 1 or 2 intakes, meaning 1 or 2 deadlines per year. So your paperwork needs to be in way in advance. You cannot move this to the last moment. You cannot wait for letters of recommendation to arrive. So you have to really plan at least a year in advance to do this. Your updated CV. I sent some documents and I got permission from my Ghanaian student I used his old CV that he sent me before I did this presentation in Ghana. And then I have a version 2. I sent that to Alexandra, and hopefully she can share that with you guys. You can see the difference between the first version and the second version, because think of that as your first connection with somebody. This is all they can see about you. You're much more than CV, but unfortunately they only have page or 2 of your experiences. So that has to be something that you have to impress them. A big thing is we do check things, so please don't lie about that. Do not provide information that is not correct, because that will eventually hunt you in a negative sense. Because if you say you know how to do something and you come to my lab and you cannot do that, I'm not sure that I'm going to trust you again that you can do other things that you said before. So your word means a lot. So be truthful about it. Your CV should have GRE and TOEFL scores. And then you should have also letter of intent ready and written. And I'll talk about that quite a bit too. And you have to have 3 references. So this is just how we perceive things when we start grad school, and then what happens afterwards. There is an evolution of everything in life, including evolution of intellectual freedom. So this is the old website, and I apologize, for whatever reason I pulled the old presentation. But so if you're ready to apply and your CV is ready, so one of the things you have to put after, so your first piece of information is your education. So where you got the degree, when you got the degree, what is your GPA, and then if you had thesis, include the thesis title as well. So GRE and TOEFL scores should follow. So make it super idiot proof for anybody reading, that they can find things very easy. Separate sections nicely so it's a visually pleasing as well. And if you worked anywhere, let's say you were research assistant in Hadziabdic lab, you will put the time interval. You work from June of 2018 to June of 2020. So, and then underneath that, you're gonna put all of your relevant experience, very bullet points, but assisted with DNA isolations, provided long-term storage, and so on and so forth. So, so people know what you've done there. And then if you had any work experience, if you worked in other areas except labs, provide that also short bullet description. And this is especially important for foreign students. Do not assume that people know what certain awards are. So if I tell you I got a Fulbright, that means not much to any of you unless you're from the US and you know the meaning of that. So usually what you have to say, Fulbright Fellowship is associated with, and a very, very short description of what that is for the rest of the world that is not familiar necessarily with a word like that. And your CV should also have a list of references with their full addresses, emails, and hopefully not personal emails. And I've seen that a lot lately, that people do not use their professional emails, but personal. So sometimes that's really hard because if you're telling me that Dr. Ivanovic is going to be your reference, but his official address is not associated with University of Sarajevo, it's associated with his Gmail account, I'm not sure if you're having a random person writing a reference for you. So just be mindful of that as well. So this is how GRE scores should be basically listed. It should be, for instance, 300 out of 340, 138 for verbal out of 170, and so on and so forth. So you should provide all of that, and then TOEFL score the same. Provide your score as the first number, and then out of how many was the maximum. So that way you make it very easy to read. I cannot emphasize enough email communication, and I will show you several things and emails that I received. But the first, after you gather all the documents that we talked about earlier, you find a school and advisor and a project. So in order to do that, let's say, because this is my field and I'm more familiar with that, you are interested in fungal genetics. There are at least 5 people in my department that do some version of fungal genetics. So you're interested at the University of Tennessee and you're interested in entomology and plant pathology. And the next thing is you need to identify who works on what. So you're gonna go to the departmental website and look for faculty. So faculty are the professors. So, and do your homework, read what they do. I would say 90% of the websites in the US are up to date, and they will have, if not there, you will have on Google Scholar their updated publications. So you want somebody who publishes. If you're in sciences, again, I have to focus and say that I'm focusing here on sciences. And I'm not saying read every single publication that they have, but you can see general themes in what they're publishing. A lot of stuff that I publish is molecular detection. It is host pathogen interactions. So anybody who is interested in conservation, host pathogen interactions can work with me. But I also do not work on animals. And if you send me an email and say, I'm very interested in working with amphibians, that means you have not even read my website. You don't know what I do. You're just sending random email to random people. And do you know what happens with that email? That gets deleted. So that doesn't even get read at all. So be careful and identify people. And this is more for a little bit of, US is much more relaxed with titles than most of the world. In my lab, because I have funky names and students have a hard time pronouncing it, they call me Dr. Denita. However, in Ghana, this is because Ghana was British colony, they used a lot of madam and sir. And in the US, people would, especially women, would cringe if you call them madam. So I told my Ghanaian students, don't call them madam, even though that is a respectful way for Ghanaians. And in Europe, people call professor doctor, and we do not use that here in US. We just use the title of doctor in front of the last name. So to give you an idea, I got one time email. So BioSketch is what we have to submit for NSF grants, which is basically a short CV. One time I got an email says, Dear Dr. Denita Hadziabdic Guerry, BioSketch. So that person did not even know that BioSketch was not part of my last name. So if you have issues with that, and if you do not know that BioSketch is not part of my last name, maybe we should not be communicating. So again, do you know what happened with that email? That got deleted. So be careful with your communications because that is your first time you're contacting somebody. So be respectful and know their real name. So I know this is a little bit too much, you're all college students, but you'd be surprised the amount of emails and poorly written emails. And I'm not talking necessarily as a foreign student, you will have issues with grammar and especially Bosnian students with articles. I've been here for 20 years and no matter what you do, you'll have issues with that. So just embrace it, but do your best. And your subject line should be something that I know immediately what you want from me. So it has to be concise, to the point. We do not read emails. We read 2-3 paragraphs, that's it. Anything longer than that, you're losing me. So for this generation, do not use short version of anything, short explanations or words of anything. You're communicating professionally. So no emojis in your official emails. And I've seen all of this as well. So I'm not telling you things that I have not seen. Your grammar may not be perfect, but use the spell check before you send it. And always include a greeting of some sort, dear Dr. So-and-so, and sign your name sincerely or gratefully or whatever you want to do, and your full name and information, how they can reach you. Everything else you want to send can be attachment. You can say, this is what I'm interested in. These are my scores. More information is in attached documents, and go from there. So I'm going to share and give you a moment to read this. And I'm going to share 3 emails that I received. Of course, I changed names and I changed locations. But these are real emails I received from students. So while you're reading this, the person is using the first paragraph basically to shortly introduce themselves. They're interested in PhD, and they've done something similar to that, and they were attracted to the program that they read about on the website. The second paragraph is, let me tell you a little bit about me, what I've done in the past. This is what I've done, and this is what I would love to continue. And then the third paragraph is basically, I believe my research and background is suitable for your project. I have attached a copy of my CV, and thank you for your time. Very simple, short, to the point. I know what this person wants. And Anna Smith got my reply. I don't know if I had money for her or not, but I definitely responded to her and said, sometimes if I see amazing scores and really good student, I suggest that person to apply, and maybe somebody else will have funding for her or him. So this is the second email I received. Worthy ma'am, there is no beginning of or the end of this, just not even reading, like visually pleasing. It's really hard to know where is the first paragraph, where is the second. So they didn't tell me much about them at all. And this was an email that was sent to probably 100 other people. So oftentimes I don't work with viruses at all, but oftentimes I get like, I'm very interested in your virology program. That means you haven't even read what I do. So be careful what you write and how you communicate. And this is my favorite one so far. So I want you to focus on this last sentence. It would be a matter of proud for me to know your opinion about my education background, and to know that if you can give me this comment, whether there is a chance for me to be applied by you. So think about that for a moment. It took me like several breaths just to read that sentence. I'm not sure what is meant by any of this. So this is the first communication with your potential advisor. So try to make a good impression and craft an email that makes sense. So after your email communication, if you get a positive reply from your advisor, and oftentimes there were plenty of students in our department right now, there were 3, 4 that I really liked. There was something about them, their emails, their letter of intent that was very impressive. I could not take them myself, but I suggested that to other faculty in my department, and now they're with us and working with different faculty. So when I see a good student, I would never advise a student to apply unless I think he or she has a good chance of getting accepted, because it is expensive. That's another $60 for application fee to apply to grad school. So that is pretty hefty for a lot of people. So I want to make sure that I cannot guarantee any of this because they have to be accepted by grad school and the department. But there's a good chance, and there's a high competition for positions. So we get emails on a daily basis like that, like 3 previous emails that I showed you. Part of that is you are going to work on your project, but you're also working on your advisor's research project. That is basically part of the learning experience. It's not just your work, but it's their work as well. And be flexible with your research interests. Oftentimes students do not know what's out there. They think they really want to do mechanical engineering, and I don't know much about mechanical engineering, but one specific aspect of that. But there's a whole world out there that they're just not aware. So when undergrads start working with us in our lab, they're just not aware there's so much molecular work associated with plant pathology. So it is pretty fascinating that we can sequence genomes and look at DNA and see how genes are turned on and off. So that is something that I didn't know that we do at all. So one of my favorite parts is the letter of intent. This is the part where I say, do not plagiarize, do not copy other people's work, but tell your story. This is my favorite part because we all have a story. Be convincing, but be sincere. And that should not be more than a page, page and a half, maximum 2 pages, but try to keep it shorter than that. And tell why you want to go to grad school. So why you should be so different, and be original. Don't, quote somebody else and don't try to impress anybody. You have already your own story that's super amazing. So use that. So do not use any vague generalizations. Just state why you want to go to grad school. So I had a student one time that was actually my first grad student, and her letter of intent was written definitely by her. There were a lot of grammar mistakes. There were a lot of funky things written, but it was written with such a passion about changing the world in a very meaningful way and why she wanted to go to grad school. And I told the committee, even though her scores were not that great, I was like, I'll take her because there's something about her and her grit, and she's going to do great things in life. And she is. She's getting her PhD now and she's doing wonderful things. But you have to see that, and we can see that through written and in between the lines as well. And make sure you tailor that story to some extent. You don't want to write a brand new letter of intent each time, but tailor that story to your potential advisor or program. I also got these letter of intents stated to somebody else in University of Virginia. And I was like, well, you're applying to the University of Tennessee, at least make sure you delete University of Virginia. So be careful that you do that as well. So letter of intent, you have a lot of really good examples online, and create list of achievements, what you've done. This is the time to show your strengths and weaknesses. I'm really good at leadership and organizing skills, but I really struggle with public speaking, and maybe I would like to improve that. I would like to do X, Y, Z and work on my weakness to improve X, Y, Z. So this is the part where you put your long-term research and teaching goals. What do you want to do when you grow up? Is it research? Is it teaching? Is it both? Do you want to go back to your home country and educate girls in rural Ghana? Is that your goal? Or do you want to work at a university or nonprofit agency? So read it, proofread it, read it again, and read it one more time. I cannot emphasize this enough. To me, this is extremely important part. This is where you summarize everything about you. And have it somebody else read it for clarity. And I've seen some really good writers, but they are just all over the place with clarity. So have somebody whom you trust. Sometimes in the application process, certain departments will require you to address specific issues. Let's say we do not have that necessarily, but can you address the how do you perceive the climate change and your role in climate change? So that can be something, or it could be thematic. It could be just water resources in Eastern Africa, and you need to talk about that. So when I say KISS approach, this is a keep it stupid simple. Just keep it simple. No fancy words. You're not going to impress anybody with using words that are, and especially for non-native speakers, we have tendency, including myself, to look for synonyms. And for Bosnian speakers also, sentences should be shorter because we have, of course, tendency to translate directly from Bosnian, and our sentences tend to be really, really long. Keep them short, as short as you can to get a clear meaning from that. Be sincere, but be honest. And we do check things. We do double check things. We call references. Sometimes people will not say things in the US, by the way, for US students, references are, for the most part, are not visible to referee, so person whom you're writing. And part of that is to protect everybody's privacy, so you can say things that are good, bad, and the ugly. And this is why it's very important to ask a person when they're writing reference for you, are they going to write a good one for you? And in other parts of the world, I've seen it and I know how that works. So references are basically you write it and they sign it, or they talk about themselves, as I was told at the beginning throughout the letter, and then they just say, I recommend this person. So a really big thing is it's very important. It will be much more personable if this is addressed to someone. So it could be either a department head, or if you can find information on the director of graduate studies, or the person that you're applying to. So if you're applying to my lab, you can say, dear Dr. Hadziabdic, and then you, or the person writes the letter. So you need to provide all of this information to your recommender. So you need to identify somebody whom you know well, and you need to discuss your plans with that person. So you need to tell them, I'm going to apply for grad school for the next fall. So throughout this period, I need to collect 7 documents, and your letter of recommendation is one of them. So what would be really helpful for that person, and I always ask this for my students, I ask them to send me their CV and their letter of intent. So that helps me draft my letter of recommendation. And I take some time to write my letters of recommendations. They usually page and a half. And I address everything from how I know them. First, I start with where they're applying, what they've done with me, how I know them in the lab, what is their work environment, what is their team mentality, what is their leadership potential, what is their intellectual curiosity. And maybe they're not good writers, but they have potential. And I say that, you know, their writing skills are not the best, but they have a potential if given the right circumstances. So I try to, and I also talk about their weaknesses. So their weaknesses may be not great communication, but seeing in the lab how this person grew, I'm sure this will not be a problem at all in the near future. I've seen them blossom into a great scientist. I've seen all sorts of things. So I try to always provide the feedback that will be really helpful for a person. But I never, ever, ever lie about anything. Because at the end of the day, I say the good, bad, and the ugly. And this is why I always say, do not burn your bridges. Because if I recommend somebody who is not going to be a good worker and whom I know is not a good student, I would rather say to that student, you may want to ask somebody else for a recommendation, which luckily I didn't have to do that. Because my name is on the line, the person who is hiring that person will never ask for a student from me again. So I want to make sure I keep that level of honesty as well. And so in some letters of recommendations, they really want you to address your writing skills and leadership skills, for instance, and you have to make sure that that is addressed. So you need to provide all of this to your recommender. And we're all busy, and give plenty of time to the person, but you can always say, I would really appreciate if you can provide this in the next 4 weeks or 3 weeks or 2 weeks. Give some kind of timeline, because you know what happened to an email that you sent me like last week? It gets pushed down and I forget about that email and it's still unread, and then more emails push it down, and after 150 emails, that gets forgotten. So send a gentle reminder, could you please, my deadline for application is August 1st, and this needs to be in before. I would really appreciate that. So when it comes to the interview process, so for foreign students, what I've done Skype, I've done Zoom, and I do several different things. Students are usually freaked out because they think this is going to be so official, and especially from other foreign countries where things are a little bit more formal. But part of this is for me to get to know them on a different level, beyond the paper of CV and letter of intent, just to see their personality. But for those that can come and visit in person, I create basically itineraries so they visit different faculty. They just don't visit me, because they will be working in a community-based environment. So they will be taking classes from these other faculty, they will meet other students. And I really, really encourage my students always to talk to new potential students. And we also have the thing called democracy. So we actually, in my lab, and I learned this from my advisor and I love it, when the new student comes in, I interview that student, but my students interview that student too, partially because students are more honest with one another, and they will tell them good, bad, and the ugly. They'll tell them, I'm very good to my students, but I'm also demanding. So I request things on time. I want them to do their part of the job, and I go above and beyond for them. So my students won a bunch of awards, fellowships and scholarships and grants. I nominate them for all sorts of things, but they have to deserve it. So I give them everything, but I also ask 100% of their dedication to the project. So if that is not something that, I also require quite a bit of independence in my students. So master students are a little bit, we have to hold them by hand a little bit more. But I think this is a great opportunity for students to tell them good, bad, and the ugly. And I think it's important for students to know the truth. And if you do not get opportunity to talk to other students, something is wrong with that department. So I always encourage that. And also, they're going to be your peers. So you want to know what kind of classes you can take, what kind of social life is there. Are there international communities? Are there international grocery stores? That is all really important to know how you can fit into that environment. So are there other faculty that you may be interested in maybe talking to them? This is if you can come to visit on campus. So I think it's important for you to get information if you visit a campus to see more than one person and more than one lab. And after you finish that, the least we can do is a very polite, because that person took time out of their day to schedule the interviews with other people, schedule interviews with other faculty. So all you can do is just to say, hey, thank you so much for the opportunity to meet with you and your faculty and your students. That's a nice gesture. And also remember, you're one of the several people they're interviewing. So you want to make sure that they remember you as well. But this is good habit for any job interview that you do. So this is what I have for you. I think I will send you updated presentation with more information via Alexandra. This is the old version, but I'd be happy to take any questions now. And I'm going to turn on my video and I'm going to stop sharing and we can go from there. So I always say there are no silly questions. So feel free to ask anything. If I went quickly over certain things, I apologize. When I get excited, I speak too fast. So.
Denita, thank you very much. While we wait for the questions, I have to tell you, I was taking notes while you were speaking.
Okay.
I didn't want to interrupt you, but I do have a few announcements and few advisor issues and that I want to share with everybody. First of all, we do have Fulbright program in Bosnia. We have foreign Fulbright program, foreign student program for people who are want to go to the United States to research for their master's or PhD program. And we have Fulbright Scholar program for people who already have PhD and who want to do postdoctoral research. And we, as EducationUSA BiH Bosnia and Herzegovina, we will be actually having a webinar with our US Embassy, who is actually in charge of administrating these programs in Bosnia and Herzegovina on June 25th, I think, about 5 p.m. And other countries usually have at least one of these Fulbright programs. So whoever is interested in learning more about them, if you come from some other country, people who are here today, or maybe people who will be watching this recording later on, please contact either your US Embassy in your country or your Fulbright Commission, because a lot of countries have Fulbright Commissions. That's a first notification about our own webinar. Second notification is tomorrow we are having an online fair with there'll be 23 different American colleges, and some of them actually do provide a master's and PhD programs. So for everybody who is here today, please go to our website or our Facebook or Instagram page. We have all the connection details for this fair. And you can actually start applying the knowledge that you gained here today, searching for your master's and PhD programs already tomorrow. The fair will be held between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. local time. So that will be between noon and 3 p.m. in the United States. Yes, so yeah, that will be, those are my two notifications. My two advice would be this, regarding essays or letters of intent and and emails. As an EducationUSA advisor, I've been doing that for 10 years. So I've been reading through people's essays, letters of intent, and even emails that they are planning to send. So there are EducationUSA centers in over 170 countries around the world. Make sure to contact one of the advisors and to ask them to take a look at it. I remember very clearly my first letter of intent for a PhD candidate in the field of mathematics. Honestly, I have no idea about mathematics. Like, I'm, especially at that level. But I was able to show the student that his flow of ideas is not as it's supposed to be, that he is not very clear at all. His sentences are not to the point. And I was really able to help him formalize what he wanted to say mathematically, whatever, in a in a very organized manner. So that's what we do. So please don't, make sure if you come from any other country except the United States, in the United States you probably have other sources of information, contact your local EducationUSA advisors. We are here to help. So that's regarding essays and letters of intent. Also, what we do, we help people with their resumes and CVs. So that's one other point. Please make sure that before you send your resumes or CVs to Denita or anybody else, just show us. We can comment on them and let you know what is okay, what is not okay, what, it's too much, too little, or whatever. We are also very culture oriented and aware, and some things that are okay to do in Bosnia in CV, they're not okay to do in the United States. So we are also very aware of that. Please contact us. Another note, yes, TOEFL scores. I know that a lot of schools, see, I was really paid. TOEFL scores, yes, a lot of schools do have their minimum TOEFL scores, but I just want to make sure that you know that those are minimum TOEFL scores. So you have to at least, get that 100 at Harvard or 72 or 86, whatever college or school you're applying to. What usually happens is that the average score is higher. So you just have to be aware that average scores are higher. Don't try to just get the minimum, but as best as you can get. Very simple. So don't try just to kind of do away with that and just to get a minimum score, which sometimes happens, I do have a question for you. Sure. Regarding GRE. So what students tell me a lot when they apply, for example, for social sciences or humanities or somewhere where writing is really important, they tell me, well, they're not going to be looking at my math GRE score at all. They will. Or, people who are applying to technical studies or mathematical fields for masters or they tell like, oh, this other score is writing, not so important. What's your attitude on that?
Both scores are super important because it doesn't matter. They have to bring you over the minimum 300 level. That's number one. Number two, all science-based majors, they have to write thesis. So the better score you have, the easier it's going to be. So to give you an idea, all three of my students right now, their TOEFL scores were around 100. The first person that struggled quite a bit with writing and her English improved over time because you're exposed to English speaking area people around you. So it naturally improves, but she struggled quite a bit with writing and her TOEFL score was 82. It was minimum. So, and that is the hard part. So all of my students are high 90s or low 100s, and it does show in their writing. So I don't have a lot of problems with their writing style because you also have to remember they have to write entire scientific paper. So my student for Bangladesh, Meher, she's just finishing her second publication from her master's degree. And this is going to really nice impact factor journal. She wrote it all. I edited, obviously, and co-authors edited, but she wrote majority of that. And then we do peer editing in my lab. So this is extremely important part. So for me, the writing part is almost as important or maybe even more important than other portions of the score. I know in Ghana, I assume the same thing is here. And the reason I'm talking about Ghana, because I lived there for a while and I was associated with EducationUSA USA in Ghana, which is in the embassy of the United States Embassy in Accra. I assume you guys have the same resources for GRE books. Is that correct? Okay, so for those of you that would like to take GRE practice exams, the Education USA centers have these books where you can practice there, or you can do them online as well. They're there to help you. And I want to come back to Fulbright. I also wrote my email in a chat. And if any of you would like to email me, or I know sometimes people are shy, they don't want to speak, they think the English is not that good, which is kind of silly. You can ask me in Bosnian too if you want. I'll translate for the rest of you guys. I'll do my best. But feel free to email me with additional questions or clarifications on any of these areas. And when you write letter of intent, it does not matter if you're going for mathematics PhD or you're doing humanities. It has to be read. All of us that review this are relatively smart people, but I'm not a math major either. So if you are talking to me in a foreign language that I do not understand, and if it's too convoluted, you're losing me. So I'll give you an example. I was a reviewer for one of the NSF proposals for students. And a student that really impressed me with her, just you remember that because you read 20, 30, 40 applications and they start blending in, they're all the same. They, you know, I read Dostoevsky and this particular quote impressed me. It's like, whatever. Be honest and be truthful about things. So, and then there were 10 more people that read Dostoevsky and the Dostoevsky impressed them. So it does not tell me much about you per se, you're trying to impress me. But the person was talking about, again, this is a science-based application. So this person was saying the reason she started doing everything she's doing, that she got a documentary as a gift on frogs, and she watched that documentary, or he, on frogs, and she was so fascinated. It was some kind of maybe National Geographic, I don't even know. But then she took a name, or he, of every single person in that documentary, which were a bunch of professors at a university. So she sent them an email and asked if she could join their programs later. I was like, how awesome and nerdy is that? It doesn't matter like what the rest of her application is. She got my attention. So it was a personal story. I connected in a different way. It wasn't another Dostoevsky story that was the same. It was a truthful story about her life and why she got interested in frogs. I was like, why frogs? So everybody has a journey like that. So use those personal stories. That's a good example that I always use. Tell your story. You have fascinating stories. So that is important part in these letters. So it has to be written for, and there were some proposals I have a PhD in science, and there were some proposals I did not understand because they were not written simply enough for a person with scientific background to understand. So you have to bring it to the point where a person with science background can understand as well. For Fulbright, I cannot emphasize enough how amazing program that is. That is basically money appropriated by Congress of the United States. And it's the idea behind exchange of ideas, cultures, science, across the world, between US scientists and the rest of the world, and between students from the US and other parts of the country. So I hosted some Fulbright scholars from other parts of the world as well. You get opportunity to see the world. You live in the country for a while, and you just get opportunity to immerse yourself in culture in ways that you would never just by visiting there. So I lived in Ghana for 4 months. I was part of the culture. I went to all the cultural events that they had there. I also did research there. I provided some seminars and presentations, and I talked to students, and it was an amazing experience. And I cannot emphasize enough how awesome opportunity that is for students. So I would highly, highly encourage everybody to apply if you have opportunity or inclination to do so.
Thank you very much. Oh, we have a question. Do you know how student visas work? If person gets accepted into a program, do they get visa automatically? That is something that EducationUSA centers work a lot on. We will have our actually visa Facebook Live in 2 weeks' time, but in the meantime, all the visa questions should actually be asked. You should ask me or other advisors. There is a a process of getting a visa, getting I-20, paying service, and so on and so on, definitely contact me. You have my email address, and I can tell you all about it.
And from our end, the way that works, so let's say you apply, we exchange emails, I like your resume, you apply to grad school accepts you. Then grad school sends your application to our departmental application. We have a graduate studies committee. I'm a member of that committee. Then the committee goes through applications, and those that are complete, they have letter of references, all the materials that are needed. Then we read them, and then we have, at least in our department, because we get so many applications, the way we do it is I get 2-3 applications, and I'm a champion for that application. Then I would say, okay, Kanita, she has GRE scores XYZ, her letter of intent is really good, she's interested. So I basically give a short summary to everybody about your background. And I say, I really like her scores. She had great grades in chemistry. I think she's going to be a good student. Her English is very, very good. I vote to accept her. Other people can say yay or nay. And then we vote. If there's a person that you already corresponded and the professor has money for you, that means they're going to pay your tuition and stipend. We can say, okay, Dr. Grant is accepting Kanita. She corresponded with him. She's going to have a full fellowship paid. So now graduate studies director sends you a letter that is signed by Dr. Grant, who accepted you, our department head, our graduate director, and you. And that becomes a contract. And that contract basically tells you, you need to work 20 hours per week on your project, 20 hours on your professor's projects. You are obligated to do this. Your stipend is going to be this much. So it's a little contract that you sign, and then it says it's based on performance and availability. And with that letter, then you can go through the process of to the embassy, and then embassy issues you or doesn't. But for the most part, we don't have issues with that, because what that tells the embassy is that you have fully paid assistantship, and when you come to the US, you will not have to cover those expenses. Otherwise, you have to prove that you have a funding source to cover those expenses. But the process itself goes through you guys. But that is on our end what happens.
Yeah.
You get a letter from us, and then goes from there.
We do a lot of advising on visas, and especially in the past couple of months, a lot of questions get on visas. So all advising centers are happy to hear you.
So speaking of that, are we issuing any visas right now?
Not currently. Latest news I heard from our embassy is until the end of June. And by around the end of June, I will contact them again to see, what is happening. But our consular office is closed until the end of June, at least at this moment.
So can US citizen travel to Bosnia without being quarantined?
Can other citizens come to Bosnia?
Without being in quarantine?
Yes.
Okay, so,
yes.
So quarantine has been lifted?
It's been lifted a week ago, 10 weeks, 15 days ago, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. Just to let everybody know, I will email you with CDs that Denita sent me, and with the YouTube link of this recording in case you missed something and you want to hear again. And you please feel free to share the recording with everybody that you feel will actually, get some use of this presentation. Thank you for coming.
Do you really quickly mind sharing the PDF, because I used the wrong presentation? You have the correct one.
Of course, I will share that as well. And I'm just gonna quickly share this one more time, just because it is important for Education USA. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for your questions, and contact us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.